Case number D11213. November 5. Surveillance report on Fernsby, J. Allen. 34-year-old male. The suspect lives in a rented basement studio at 1864 Batu Street. The home was previously owned and lived in by his mother Fernsby, Alba, born Kabish, who rented the basement to a young couple from the former Yugoslavia. 6 years ago Mrs. Fernsby became sick and the suspect moved in to take care of her. Despite never having left the borough, Mrs. Fernsby came to believe she was a minor aristocrat of the Hohenberg line. She began speaking of her youth in the Austrian Empire, her engagement to Archduke Otto Franz and her family's lost fortune in a distinct Tyrolese accent. Mounting medical costs forced the Fernsbys to sell their home and the Yugoslav tenants made them the best offer. The suspect and his mother moved into the basement and the Yugoslavs moved into the home. Mrs. Fernsby's health continued to deteriorate, her medical bills continued to rise and her family's fortune was never located. 2 years ago, believing she was being poisoned by Serbian nationalists, Mrs. Fernsby died in her sleep. Unable to earn enough money to move out, the suspect has stayed living in the basement. The Yugoslavs are sympathetic and have never raised his rent higher than legally permitted. Returning home from work each evening at 10 p.m., the suspect boils himself 2 eggs and eats them in bed while scrolling through short-form videos, falling asleep sometime around 1 a.m. Sleep is good to him, and he pursues an ongoing tryst with a popular television star from the 1980s with whom he shares a birthday. His alarm goes off at 8 a.m. and after spending some time trying to recall the events of the previous evening, he gets out of bed, gets dressed and makes his way to the coffee shop where he takes his breakfast, 1 dark coffee with no cream or sugar and 2 slices of toast, heavily buttered. He quietly eats his breakfast pretending to be occupied on his phone while he tries to think of something clever to say to the barista but never comes up with anything. He once told her a joke about an existentialist in a cafe in Paris ordering a coffee with no cream or sugar but she didn't get it and it made him feel terribly self-conscious. He fantasizes of being able to win people over with his wit and intellect but resigns himself to smiling timidly and tipping too much. Other patrons are able to easily engage the barista in conversation which the suspect observes with marvel and envy. Once a month the coffee shop hosts an open mic for comedy, spoken word, music, and poetry. The suspect imagines himself reading one of his poems, but has never committed anything to paper as he fears the process of writing will be corrupting. Instead, he keeps fragments in his head, constantly editing them. Unsure of how to interact with people, he leaves without saying goodbye. The coffee shop is only a short walk from the train station where he waits to take the 9:05 number 4 train to downtown. In the few minutes he waits he watches the people around him and imagines their lives are overflowing with friends, beaches, and noodle salad. He is slightly ashamed when he compares his life to theirs but unless there is significant track maintenance, the train usually arrives on time, sparing him from further marinating in these thoughts. Once on the train he encounters riders from the south of the borough and feels better about his lot. 9 minutes and 5 stops later he arrives at the Babbitt building, where for $600 a week and a 0.8% commission minus desk fees, he has worked for the last 11 years as a real estate sales associate for the firm of Feinberg Feinbaum Feinstein & Fein. He spends his mornings cold calling property owners, trying to convince them to sell their properties through the firm. They generally reply with a rage-filled abuse, demanding never to be called again and threatening legal action. He has never had a good year but has had sufficient mediocre years to avoid being fired. He has only made it once onto the weekly sales board but that was because he got lucky and landed on a young man whose father had recently died and left him with several apartment buildings which he wanted to sell so he could pursue his dream of opening a nightclub in Ibiza. The sale closed. He collected his 0.8% commission minus desk fees and 9 months later received a postcard from Ibiza inviting him to come, however the postcard had no return address. The firm of Feinberg Feinbaum Feinstein & Fein is always reminding its sales associates that they are a family but the suspect suspects this is not true. He also suspects that they have nothing of real value to offer their clients because everything they do offer, the clients can do for themselves at no cost. Sometimes his supervisor, Feinbaum, whose net worth is $3.7 million and who has not slept in 23 years, calls the suspect into his office and speaks to him as if they were characters in a Mamet play. The suspect texts a friend from his school days with whom he is sporadically in contact asking him if he'd like to meet for a drink after work and receives no response. At noon, the suspect eats his lunch at this bench. There is a food cart nearby that sells 3 tacos for $9, which is a good deal. Each day he buys 3 entrail tacos and a beer. He enjoys eating his innards and tries not to think about how the second half of the day will go. If his mind wanders back to the office, he adds more Chulo's brand authentic Sonoran hot sauce, bringing him back to the present moment. He enjoys lunching here as it gives him time to himself since most of his co-workers prefer to feed at their desks. The only other person who used to eat at the table was an old man who worked on another floor as an archivist, but he has not been around in quite some time. Although they rarely spoke, the suspect thinks of him when he is having lunch and hopes he is well. Back at the office, the suspect spends the rest of his day searching for leads to add to the company's cold call database. This consists of matching a property address, to an owner, to a phone number and entering it into a database. After several hours of this, the suspect grows bored and starts imagining ways to reorganize the data by matching sales associates and leads based on shared interests, making it easier for sales associates to build rapport. He checks his phone again to see if his school friend has replied, but he has not, despite the message having been read hours ago. At 5 p.m., and not a minute later, the suspect leaves the office. While most of the sales associates go to the local bars for happy hour, the suspect prefers to take the 5:09 p.m. train back to his neighborhood and go to his local bar. There, under an evening sky spread out like a patient etherized upon a table, he orders a dark beer at room temperature with a gin chaser. The day's tedium melting away, his confidence rising, he tries making small talk with the other patrons with references to literature, but they mostly find him dull and pitiful. They've all witnessed him get thrown out for being excessively irritating. By his third drink he starts writing on the back of coasters and napkins, imagining himself reading to a captive audience. It was a day after school in 1992. One of the neighborhood kids, a small, petty child prone to hysterics, came running down the street. "What's the hurry?" I ask. "Home, I'm going home. They're going to say shit on network TV." That night a man in Bradenton Beach, with nothing left to lose, won the lottery. That was 30 years ago. The TV show is still running, but nobody watches it anymore. And the man from Bradenton Beach has long since died from his winnings. And the small, petty child is now a small, petty man, with a big house and big money. And I'm still living at my mother's house. Only I'm 30 years older. And I still can't do anything. And I still don't know anything. Only that nobody is somebody unless he has money. And that my allies were all lies. Still, it's a beautiful world. Realizing it is not the masterpiece he envisioned, he throws it out and wonders why his struggles have not yielded him any great works. 200 milliliters of alcohol gets him a poem. 375 a short story. Attempting a novel is too dangerous. He worries he will end up another cliché of unfulfilled genius. He longs for the courage to do what he wants, but he is inert and incapable. It is only fear that keeps him honest. It is only cowardice that keeps him from surrendering. And the only thing worse than being spoken badly of, is not being spoken of at all. Still ignored and in a quiet, impotent rage, he pays his tab, tips too much and makes his way back home where 2 boiled eggs and short-form videos await his return. Then he sleeps. And together with the TV star from the 1980s with whom he shares a birthday, he dreams stolen dreams. He dreams in purple. Of when the autumn purples the earth and the sunlight sleeps in the vineyard. Of the purple dusk of twilight time stealing across the meadows of his heart. And for a few hours he knows peace. It is the determination of this investigator that the suspect does not warrant the continued expenditure of surveillance resources and that this investigation be terminated. End of report.